Morning. We ran into each other by chance after waking up in the morning. Hagana was the first to issue a clear greeting. Ah, I replied as we both went into the living room. In the living room, Lisa had prepared breakfast. When she saw Hagana and me come in at the same time, she smiled gently. Today there are 72 stocks. Validity is really high, and there were a number of stocks with large price fluctuations. I want you to be careful. I got it. I'm no amateur. I said that while I chewed on some toast, and I knew that Lisa was holding back laughter while she held a coffee cup by the sink. Well, was she being cheeky? Was what she really wanted to say, I suppose. But Barton had called me out, seeing my impressive trading skills. Even now I was entrusted with many people's money and reaping large profits. Even though that was thanks to Hagana's program, the basis for that program was based on my judgment. Thus, I didn't think it was a bluff. This was the foundation of confidence. Hagana no longer sat at the other end of the table. She was now always sitting beside me as we ate. Sitting there next to me, Hagana asked me a question. If you aren't an amateur, then what are you? Sarcasm? No, I didn't think so. I replied to the expressionless Hagana. An investor. An investor? But I don't intend to use the money I stole from my mother. I threw those words directly at Hagana. It seemed that Hagana remembered suddenly, and she looked like she was about to cry as she pulled back. But even then, Hagana kept looking at me and repeated once more quietly. An investor. Yeah. Looking at the display, I said, We are investors. Next to me, Hagana took a deep breath, which signaled that she understood. As she leaned against the sink, drinking coffee, while she watched the exchange between Hagana and me, Lisa smiled without saying a single word and began to wash dishes. We was what I said. There was no question who that the other person was. We'll destroy Mr. Troche. I said that as I glanced at Hagana. Hagana's eyes were unwavering as she nodded, like she was staring down a target in a mafia movie. With 500 million moles of funds in the virtual market, 3 times with margin trading would be 1.5 billion moles, I was well aware of the fact that it would be impossible, were this to be on the real market, to shift such a massive sum of money quickly. However, in the virtual setting, all participants were given 100 million moles to start with. Thanks to that, contestants would get totally immersed in large volume trading in a rough and tumble manner. If that became the case, then I would really be at an uncontested advantage. With my perspective on the program now changed, I felt like a fish released in water, able to swim around the market with total freedom. On top of that, the fund totals and rankings were updated every minute of every day, so I was thankful that I didn't have to be wary of high rollers like in a casino. It was completely possible in reality for a single person out there with a disgustingly large amount of money to mow down the competition. That was the true form of the demons who lurked in the first 10 minutes of trading. Here and there I had seen some come together like piranhas ready to tear apart game. But in my opinion, what was anticipated was so clearly obvious that it would be difficult to derive any profit. Lure things in with bait, and when they come close, attack. With Hagana's program, I knew how much prices had to move before people using similar programs to trade would flock to the stock. Each transaction would yield 0.3 or 0.5%, which wasn't much in terms of profit. The time spent looking over at Hagana's terminal was precious, and before long Hagana started to read the stocks out loud. On top of that, Hagana in her own way had a strong personality and did not know anything about taking it easy. As I listened to her raging words, I started trading like crazy so that even the time to breathe seemed precious. Naturally, it destroyed me. The fatigue was no different from torture. In the instant that the morning's trading was completed, I looked straight up as if my computer gave me an electric shock. Taking a deep breath, I fell back against the chair without another thought. I couldn't move an inch. I couldn't utter a single word. Even with my eyes closed, the numbers swirled in my head. The necessity to do one thing or another caused a feeling of unease to swirl around in my mind. But it wasn't because I was not feeling well. Facing my objective, no matter what tools I used, it was clear from what I had to do. After all, what I was doing was no different from what I was suffering before. In fact, the intensity was much higher. But I wasn't feeling bad about it. Pardon me, that was a big one. Furthermore, 3 days after we started concentrating on the investment contest, Hagana brought me a damp towel warmed in the microwave, since I was slumped on my back staring at the ceiling. I imagine Lisa had suggested that she do that, but I was really happy she did. Even though trading was over, she didn't get up from her chair. She continued to sit next to me, tapping away at her terminal. Hagana herself also needed rest, so she closed her eyes at times. It was very quiet, and even though we only looked at each other when we talked, somehow it felt very friendly. I knew that we were both running towards the same destination. Once the break was over, we'd eat, proceed with the afternoon trading, and then limp on until dinner, exhausted to the point of not being able to stand. At dinner, we could return to being human again, with Lisa providing some light banter while Hagana stayed by my side, making improvements to her program. Our virtual funds were increasing in 10 million intervals. Unsurprisingly, Mr. Troche, who had an MBA from Harvard University, completely controlled the market. A week before we had to stop trading, he had amassed 360 million moles through his trades. While the increase in assets was rather shocking, I said to myself that it wasn't an impossible plateau to reach. But to close all positions with such precision was impressive of him, I thought. With the market this frantic, there was a chance prices would go up, but also a chance you'd lose the shirt off your back. Specifically, if you had Mr. Troche's levels of assets, there was a possibility you could get targeted, what with trades you were making analyzed. There were already a number of people who had been targeted and had fallen tremendously in the rankings. The secret to how that worked was that even for people who had finished their trading but had unclosed positions, the amount of money displayed next to the rankings would change as the stocks moved every day. Were someone to use a program like Hagana's, one could ferret out those stocks by looking at all available stocks and computing possibility candidates, but comparing the price fluctuation of stocks with the movement of the fortunes of the top-ranked participants. After that, all that would be necessary would be to join forces with others to do some reverse trading. We were sitting in 4th place at 150 million moles, with the distance to 2nd place being 100 million moles and 3rd place being about half that amount away. Technically, there was 1 week left, but there was a Sunday in between, which made for 6 actual days of trading possible. With Sunday in the middle, after trading on Monday and Tuesday, it would all end at 5 PM on Wednesday. Hagana and I mustered all our available strength. The moment a loss was taken due to carelessly not heeding a warning from the program, Hagana would lash out with that foot of hers, and when she misread something about certain stocks, I'd yell at her afterwards. Even then, things didn't turn gloomy. I knew that Lisa would become excited many times during all of this, but it never made things worse. 30 million moles of profit on Thursday and 20 million on Friday put us at 200 million moles, passing the guy at 3rd place by a narrow margin, with only 40 million moles between us and 2nd place. There was still the 160 million mole difference between us and Mr. Troche. For Saturday, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, we had to increase our total gain by 80% at all costs. We were trading completely with full leverage, so it was no different from having 600 million moles at our disposal. So all we had to do was to achieve a real return of 27%. Returns of 10%, 10%, and 10% would be more than efficient. But based on the performance on Thursday and Friday, whether this was possible or not was unclear. Honestly, we were trading at an unprecedented level. We were pushing ourselves with all our might, and Hagana was whittling down her sleeping hours. She'd camp out waiting for Lisa to go to bed, and then sneak into my room, working on improving the program until morning. There were times where she would be sleeping like a log beside me. Also, she was sleep deprived a lot more, and would drop her chopsticks or spoon more often during meals. We both knew that we were nearing our limits. However, Lisa wouldn't object. There was no room for her to do so. On Saturday, at the end of our discussion, we thought about taking on more risk. Fiddling with the numbers on the program in order to select a number of stocks with large price fluctuations, we selected more speculative stocks. For the ones with large price fluctuations, many were selected through derivations based off the mathematical principles Hagana utilized. It was an unattainable region, much like the concept Barton had spoke of, a region of extreme risks, rises and falls, where human sentiment could clearly be seen. In the midst of all this tension, Hagana and I began Saturday's trading. We felt strong progress, as I was suddenly able to knock down the feeling of tension from feeling the time crunch. Hagana went so far as to borrow Lisa's terminal and ask Cyril to copy the program. During trading, the program's content was updated in real time. Doing all this while being sleep deprived and exhausted, we weren't looking so healthy. But even so, at the end of Saturday, when she saw that we had managed to hit 60 million rules in profit, even Hagana was all smiles. For the moment, we were in second place. Only 2 more times. If we could do that again 2 more times, we could defeat Mr. Troge. That excitement blew away all that fatigue and sleep deprivation. We had set foot upon new territory. No, more accurately, it was Hagana's program that led me right into the footsteps of a deeper place within me. But even then, I wasn't against the idea. If there was something I could give to Hagana, I was determined to give her everything. An email from Barton arrived on my computer. Interesting, it said. Barton, who paid the sponsorship fee and could look at the trading history of all participants in the trading contest, could believe that we had gone a step further based on our trading history. Saturday night, that excitement was a helping hand as Hagana and I researched stocks and updated her program in my room till 3 in the morning. But no matter how much willpower was replenished, the body has its limits. Pathetically, I was the first to give in, and I slept that day. Hagana said she had more things to think about, and got up, but given how often that had already happened thus far, I paid her no heed and continued to sleep. Light fell upon the desk as Hagana tapped her terminal, but the call of sleep was enough that I paid absolutely no heed to this as I slipped back into unconsciousness. That was why when I awoke suddenly, I thought it was strange. I figured I had neglected to go and use the bathroom. But I realized that that wasn't the case, as I heard the sound of someone sleeping nearby, and it wasn't me. Huh? I wasn't sure whether I was half asleep or not. What I did know was that Hagana had gotten into bed and was sleeping next to me. Or rather, I wasn't sure whether next to me was the right way of describing the situation. Hagana's hands were tucked close to her body as she slept like a baby in the fetal position. Her face was above my right shoulder, her forehead was against my cheek. Her hand clutched my pajamas. The side of her foot was atop of mine. Hagana's body temperature was rather high, enough for me to wonder if she might have had a fever. But more so than it just being abnormal, her high body temperature was similar to that of an infant. That was why, I suppose. Though I was surprised when I realized that she was sleeping next to me, I didn't think of anything beyond that. Besides, I wasn't exactly filled with guilt about it. I was more filled with the notion of hopefully not waking up Hagana, as well as a sense of happiness. This was the first that I'd known how comfortable it was to be attached to someone like this. Before long I succumbed to sleep, and morning soon came. It's not like I had set an alarm, so it felt like I could just sleep forever, but I woke up at the usual 7 a.m. Though I'd only slept about 3 or 4 hours, today I woke up on the dot as usual. Immediately I thought about Hagana. She really was still clinging on to me as she slept. Actually, we both woke up at the same time. The awakened Hagana looked blankly at nothing in particular. She was basically slipping out of her half-asleep state, and I could see that she still didn't know where she was. Perhaps due to fatigue and sleepiness, she had simply forgotten where her bedroom was. That's what I thought when Hagana closed her eyes and curled her body more. She then yawned loudly and looked at me. It was rather close to her. And with the usual intense look in her eyes, she spoke. "Your snoring is loud." Anger and a strange kind of happiness were hanging dangerously over the room. The only reason an accident didn't occur was that Hagana quickly, or rather a bit too quickly, slipped out of bed. In the morning light, Hagana's beautiful hair fell smoothly along her back without a strand of bed hair. She murmured in a delightfully low tone as she stretched, and I could see the line of her body clearly as her pajamas rustled. Hagana's body heat lingered in the futon, as did her fragrance, which was clearly not from shampoo or body soap. Courtesy of the phenomenon called morning glory, I couldn't exactly get out of bed at this point. Hagana tapped the terminal on the desk to start it up, and she turned towards me with it in hand. "How long do you intend to sleep?" She said that with a disdainful look in her eyes. Even with her contempt, I couldn't really make excuses, and thus I replied, "Give me 5 more minutes." Hagana thought about it for a moment and nodded. "I'll come and wake you up in 5 minutes." She walked briskly out of the room. 5 minutes was more than enough to get prepared. And to probably, bend the morning wood to the side, just fuck off! Anyway, again, I spent that day in the living room entirely with Hagana, devoting all our time to updating the program and analyzing stocks. It was around afternoon when we had someone stop by. I figured it would have been Chris or Toyama, but surprisingly, it turned out to be Sarald. "You haven't come at all lately, so I figured I'd stop by instead." I hadn't called for him, but I was thankful for the juice and snacks he brought. Lisa basically didn't buy that stuff after all, and I was not used to buying it, as it would be a waste. I took a can of dark carbonated soda, one of which was developed on Earth, and one in another way held near. Complete control of the market for 100 years. Coca-Cola? Probably. While Hagana drank 100% pure orange juice. Both of them were imports, which compared to the synthetic stuff was several times more expensive. That was rather considerate of Sarald, I thought. "So, you two are looking awfully friendly with each other." He teased with those words as he put his hand around my shoulder and took a peek. The rustle of his hair was enough to startle Hagana, who was next to me. "Sarald, don't bother them." Before I could even complain about it, Lisa said it for me. Sarald looked up and shrugged his shoulders. "What, really?" Really. I wasn't sure whether Lisa was copying me or Sarald, but in either case, that was what she said. Still, it was without a doubt that it was for real. Hagana and I had long ago surpassed the level of just playing around. "Hey, Hagana, are there any bugs in the program?" Sarald continued his antics and said that to her. Hagana turned towards Serald in her chair, looked directly at him and spoke. No. Her response was enough to elicit a laugh at his expense, and Lisa smiled as she patted Serald on the shoulder and consoled him. But as Hagana was in the midst of turning back towards her terminal, she realized something, stopped, and then spoke. It's an impressive level of completeness, in my opinion. I looked up and turned around to see Serald staring blankly. Then, like a good responsible adult, he was smiling ear to ear. Next to him, Lisa had a gentle smile on her face as Hagana turned back to what she was working on. One way or another, everything was in front of us as we moved forward. Well, with that said, we'll be getting out of your way then. Then, after taking the time to come by too. Oh my, are you saying that you aren't satisfied with my company? And that's what Serald and Lisa talked about. Perhaps owing to the fact that they were around the same age, Lisa seemed to be speaking more frankly than usual. That's not it, but isn't the excitement of getting to know someone for the first time, though? Wait, but there isn't the excitement of getting to know someone for the first time, though. Oh my, since when was our relationship like that? I looked up briefly and saw Lisa smile boldly with her arms folded. Serald saw this and put his hand around Lisa's shoulder. Seeing this kind of annoyed me. That's a harsh way to put it. Beaten down by the rain, did you not have an inclination to offer a helping hand to save me? Was that not love, then? It is love, and in total seriousness, too. Those words startled me. Lisa was into Serald? Speaking of which, Serald had boasted before about sleeping on Lisa's lap. On top of that, seeing as this was the first time Hagana met Serald, it was hardly possible that Lisa and Serald had been alone together in the church before. An adult man and woman, and getting to lay his head in her lap to boot. Honestly, that did agitate me a bit. Could it be that Lisa and Serald were... But Christ loves everyone equally. Just like that, Lisa ducked under Serald's arm, and he did look disappointed that Lisa slipped from his grasp. Sorry, okay? You sneaky woman, you. The Lord will love you whether you act virtuously or otherwise, so you don't need to worry about it. Huh, I've fallen for a troublesome woman. Such a liar. As Lisa chuckled, Serald scratched his large head. I wasn't sure if this was real or just some joke, but they did earnestly appear to be close. And while I looked at those two, I realized that something was directed at me from right next to me. Hagana was scowling at me. What are you doing? There was very little time remaining for us. If we were to overtake Mr. Troche in first place, our focus could not become fragmented. Hagana's anger was rather considerable. I turned back to my computer quickly and resumed work. But somehow, Hagana continued to look displeased, much more than usual. In the end, that day Serald ate dinner with us. Serald talked a great deal, and Lisa seemed to have more fun than usual. Also, before he left, he stood in the church with Lisa and they had an honest talk about the debt. Lisa laughed and evaded Serald's questions. Even if they were a joke and that Serald liked Lisa, he was almost certainly another of Lisa's rescues. According to the policeman I'd overheard while I was escaping from the Lunar Chinese restaurant, Serald had something of an amazing background. Oops. It was possible that Serald succeeded in the highly competitive world that was Newton City, and had somehow fallen from grace. Besides, he didn't seem like a bad guy, and deep down appeared to be rather serious-minded. Maybe he heard about Lisa's debt and wanted to help her as a way to pay her back, but I couldn't imagine that he would have deep pockets. Just listening to the conversation, I came to the conclusion that he did, in fact, live inside the Big Bull Cafe. Granted, Lisa didn't look like one to do anything arbitrarily, so I was somewhat relieved. Why I was relieved, I wasn't sure, but in any case, I was relieved. I stopped stealing glances at them and went back to my room. In my room, Hagana was updating her program. When I got back in, we continued our banter back and forth, right where we'd left off. I wasn't sure if that forcefulness was more over the top than normal, or if it was just me overthinking. And then, on that day as well, Hagana and I slept together. She seemed to cling to me even more than she had the night before. You know, just a feeling, Hal. Just a feeling. She doesn't want you to leave when this ends. Just a feeling. We're getting close to the ending. I can just feel it in my gut! Getting close. Starting from the following Monday, there would be only 3 days left for trading. 100 million moves left until we each reach Mr. Troge. Profits per day of 30 million, and 40 million would be enough. It can be done. It will be done. With that enthusiasm, trading began. But as soon as Hagana and I began trading, we started to feel uncomfortable. An hour elapsed when it evidently became clear what was strange. After a few more hours, when the root of the problem was discovered, it was certainly surprising. I can't calculate with this math, Hagana murmured, dumbfounded. After finishing my trades frantically, I felt exhausted too. We only managed profits of 10 million mules. With that, the hurdle was raised to 50 million, and 50 million for tomorrow and the day after. To make things worse, at one point in the morning I thought that victory was at hand, only to fall into despair now. The problem was very clear. The number of participants had dropped off significantly. All participants were given 40 days to conduct trades, and after the participants who were done leave one by one, new people would come in at the same time. However, there were only 3 days left in the contest, so a large number of people had already run out of time. Certainly, those numbers would gradually begin to decrease. However, considering that a large number of contest participants either had part-time work or were doing this at their own leisure, I had expected that many of them would be trading the days before and after the weekend, before it all came to an end. If the number of participants decreased, then the flow of capital would decrease as well. There's no point in wanting to trade 100 million mules if no one could even match 80 million mules. Hagana and I had managed to reach 260 million mule in funds, with leverage at the time of trading. That would turn into 780 million mules unusable. Today on Monday, the number of stocks that we could throw these funds at had diminished. By Tuesday and Wednesday, it was already a certainty that the flow of capital would have dried up. This was bad. It became an exponentially bad situation. What should we do? Hagana asked me a question. I relayed to Hagana what I was pondering and what I could think up. Thus, I was dead certain that as she spoke, she could guess my response to some degree. We have no choice but to throw funds into a large company. I wasn't sure whether or not mathematics could be applied to such a stock, though. Rather, there must be others who were thinking the exact same thing that we were, so I can imagine that tomorrow and the day after there would be a certain number of stocks that would be focused on for trading. Would mathematics be able to see through that? I looked at Hagana, but her eyes showed uncertainty. Fewer stocks will make these statistics more unreliable. In that case, we'll just have to increase value within a safe limit. It was a rather simplistic conclusion, and thus we had no choice but to go along with the simple idea. We were like fish searching deeper and farther as the water dried up around us quickly. Thinking in that manner, with Mr. Troge having finished trading when he did, it was like he saw the situation we were in now. Genius. He was a genius. but we managed to pull within 90 million moles of that genius. It was a dizzying pace to get to 3rd place, and things came together once we hit 200 million moles. Time mercilessly continued to flow, and soon it was the start of Tuesday. Hagana stayed up all night analyzing the trading data from Monday, and updated the program to increase the range of available possibilities. I thought I'd give her a hand, but instead she said that she'd prefer that I got some sleep. Specifically, she said that there would be no problem if she fell asleep, but all would be lost if I did. It was rather sound and thus hard to refute, and for a change I slept before the day changed. Though I only slept with Hagana twice, I found it surprising how cold it felt to sleep by myself. Then, when Tuesday's trading ended, Hagana and I did not exchange a single word. There was the possibility that we were simply tired, but the root of that silence was the things that weren't as profitable as we thought. A gain of 22 million moles. We couldn't even hit our quota. That left us with 68 million moles more to go. Participants dropped off more than on Monday, and the scramble for the last scraps of the pie was ferocious. In the middle of it all, Hagana was on the verge of tears. Her program was completely off the mark. Somehow we arrived at 2nd place. Or rather, 3rd place dropped off considerably, and the 2nd place was now a practical certainty. However, at this point we'd only received 50,000 moles. Once Lisa's loan was paid off, then that was that. I wondered if the reason Hagana didn't just say to quit at this point was because their 50,000 moles felt more to her like a borrowed sum. And on that note, I hadn't done any trading on the real markets, so my funds hadn't increased at all since then. At this point, if Hagana were to trade by herself, by and large, she'd be able to make money. Certainly, if I was out of the picture, Hagana's proportions of earnings would increase as well. If that were the case, 100,000 moles wouldn't be out of the question, would it? If I could, I wanted to leave her with as much to work with as possible by way of our funds. 200,000 moles. I felt that it was the least that should be there, given how hard Hagana and I were working. After dinner, Hagana and I looked into the current possibilities. There were now only 2 choices available. One was to do what we did today. The other was to narrow things down to exactly 1 stock. A single stock is dangerous. Hagana said that suddenly. But it would be impossible if we went with more stocks. The amount of funds for trading was ridiculous, and though anything could be purchased, it opened up room for more mistakes. At this point, we were more like a prominent whale in a dried up pond. More like a beached whale, like out of a film, though. Unable to move due to an enormous body, blowing out salt water in anguish. Once a purchase was made, the price would go up, and all the others lying in wait would sell at once, setting the profit amount. This would drop the price back down, and we would have no one to sell our large amount of shares to. If we sell them off carelessly, in the face of the very few buy requests, the only thing left would be to throw in the towel. The price will go down, and once low enough, a sell-off will begin. Going in through margin selling, the same thing will happen. In the end, the exact same thing will happen in reverse. In order to avoid that, we had to be able to move our huge body around, in other words, focus on a single stock and trade with full force. By grabbing and twisting up all that selling pressure, a higher price could be forced. If prices could be raised artificially while the last trades were made, then we'd win it all. I wasn't sure whether or not monsters lurked in the last 10 minutes of the investment contest. If nothing else, with Mr. Troge having already finished trading, right now at this moment, we were the giants in the marketplace. I realized in order to win, all that could be done was to force prices up artificially and hold out to the end. Will everything be okay? That was all Hagana could ask. We have no choice now. That was all I could respond with. The room fell quiet during the night, and mere silence held complete control. Whether you laughed or cried, in less than 20 hours, victory or defeat would be decided. It doesn't seem like I can do much else now. Hagana suddenly said that. Huh? Hal's greatest strength is my greatest weakness, after all. For a time, all we literally did was eat and sleep together. At the very least, we were in agreement on that. Well, I suppose so. When I said that, Hagana looked downcast as she nodded. At least it appeared that she was downcast. At the brink of victory or defeat, I came to the realization that my abilities were not enough. When I'd first met Hagana, I figured without a doubt that that was the case. But things were different now. Everything was the reverse. Honestly, I felt a pain as if a part of my body had been severed. It's too bad, though. That's what Hagana said. She then tapped her terminal, and with a peculiar beeping sound, the light went off. If Hagana were an android, it would be the perfect sound for her, as if she had been deactivated. With the light off and the screen off the terminal, suddenly the room seemed barren. As if all that enthusiasm up until now was a joke, that silence returned. Even after the power shut off her terminal, Hagana did not get up from the chair. I understood Hagana's feelings to the point that it pained me to do so. To have gotten this far and not be able to keep going was indeed painful. Of course, she could watch over my shoulder. She could also try to offer some advice while running the program. However, the number of stocks under consideration was limited, and it was an undeniable fact that the more we had to rely on massive swings, the less useful Hagana's program would be. It was evident that much as Hagana's program consumed me, the reverse could be said as well. It really was painful, thus, it must have been painful for Hagana. Right now, looking at the side of her face as she appeared on the verge of crying, I wanted to say something. I tried desperately to make myself think. Was there not something, anything at all, that Hagana could do? I considered every possibility. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that I thought back on everything that I had talked to Hagana about. There must have been something. It's not possible that there wasn't anything at all. Barton had said that excellent quaints would turn everything about a trader into numbers. If that was the case, then there has to be something. And then Hagana sniffled and stood up from the chair. Good night. With a short utterance, she made for the door without even looking at me. Instead of a terminal, she had her folded up pajamas in her hand. I was surprised, as I wondered when she had grabbed them, and something in my heart throbbed as I realized that she had intended on sleeping in here tonight. And so, in that brief moment, I grabbed her arm. It was a rather reflexive thing to do. Hagana's wrist was slender and small, but the bone was firm, and there was a slight bit of flesh and soft skin upon it. I could feel her body temperature. Hagana turned around and looked at me. Looking back at me, her eyes showed unfounded fears. After being sold on Earth and having run away from home, perhaps this had happened before. I couldn't imagine that Hagana's parents were happy to sell her off. Certainly, when Hagana ran away from home, her hand was held just like this. However, that couldn't buy Hagana her freedom, or stop her from being sold, I suppose. Powerless, only holding powerlessly onto Hagana's hand. Perhaps, for a brief moment, Hagana had hope. If that weren't the case, then I would have been at a loss to explain the despair in her eyes when she first turned them towards me. Hagana looked downcast and tried to shake my grip off, but I continued to hold on. Hagana tried a second and third time to shake me off, when she suddenly started to cry a bit. I didn't know what I should do. I knew that this was a bad situation. Seeing such an atrocity in today's society was enough to make me cry as well. Hagana used the side of her hand to try and loosen my hand. I applied force and could see Hagana's face showing signs of discomfort. Hagana couldn't move. She could only give in to the force. That's how it always was. Force? Movement? At those words, my mind wandered off briefly. It was a sensation as if my mind was being assaulted by messages from outer space. With a buzzing sound, or rather, what I imagined it sounded like, the third eye in my mind opened. Hey. Let go. Hagana sobbed a little as she said that. Hey. Hey. Are you listening? With all my might, I pulled Hagana to me. Hagana's body was delicate and light. As soon as I pulled her close, she looked up from my chest. What are you doing? There is a way. Huh? There is a way. Your terminal. What? Your terminal. There is a way. There is something you can do. I said that to the teary, dark-eyed Hagana, who I still held in my grasp. I reached out towards the terminal that was about to fall from her hand. What? What can I do? There is a trade volume that's sleeping. Sleeping? Hagana repeated those words, then opened her eyes suddenly. But that path hasn't been... Exactly. There's the volume of all those who ended their trading with positions fully leveraged on margin. Someone looking from the outside wouldn't know how many were still alive. So there's always a chance that sellers and buyers could be off in their predictions. If the trade volume wasn't enough, then all you needed was to wake the sleepers up. For example, imagine a stock that was loaded with people who had bought tons on margin and ended their trading. The margin trade volume was always open to the public, so one would know immediately who had been purchasing what. The problem was for sellers, particularly those who had hoped to make a profit through price increases in what they had purchased with margin buying. It isn't clear how much was still in play and would turn with them to sell. If roughly all margin buyers were out of commission, then the advantage would turn to us, the buyers. When prices go up, sellers would appear and the short sales that worked would be taking their profit, but sales wouldn't come from people who were profiting with margin buy positions. When the pressure to sell weakens, those who are margin selling would get scared and pull out. And in doing so, buyers should come out of the woodwork, having picked up the scent, creating an artificial price hike. And if the margin buyers were alive and the price rises, then certainly they'd sell in order to take profits. With the market in an uproar, there would be absolutely not any level-headed individuals who could hold on to their paper gains and wait it out. Sell before taking a loss. Sell no matter what. In other words, if the price couldn't rise enough, then we would have failed. If within all that margin trading only we knew who was alive or dead, we would gain an enormous advantage through the psychological battle waged. Even now, with liquidity having dried up, this was the only way we could extract victory in this battle. And Hagana's abilities would be able to ferret out whether the margin buyers were alive or dead. We were aware of the ones ready to pounce on people who had ended trading with open positions by making opposing trades, and riding on their actions we can turn a profit. The relation between price fluctuation and ranking can be calculated with math. That kind of operation was Hagana's specialty. Hagana pushed away from me, then sat in a chair and turned on her terminal. It looked as if her mind was already busy with calculations. Will this finish by morning? At my question, Hagana's hands stopped, and she answered me promptly. This is simple. Those were heartening words. So go to sleep first. Hagana tapped her terminal with force as she said this. Standing next to her, all I could do was shrug my shoulders. No way I could sleep now. Hagana's hands had stopped for a moment, but they then resumed their work. Numerical values were inputted vigorously, and computed as new formulas were written one after another into the program. Besides, it'll be done soon, right? I knew that she felt annoyed at my sarcastic words. But even then, it was a positive, gung-ho kind of feeling I got from her. Hagana was not someone to call on a bluff. It was then, perhaps after 30 minutes had elapsed. Finally, with a resounding tap, she looked up. Immediately after that, the CPU and HDD within her terminal started emitting a unique sound. There was a bar on the screen showing that calculations were in progress as the color of the bar filled from the left side to the right side. As the stock data was completely inserted and dissected, perhaps it was making sense of things. After many seconds of silence, a list of stocks appeared. Hagana then looked at me. Which looks good. My job had finally come to an end. It was written all over the satisfied expression on Hagana's face. By her side, I took a peek at Hagana's terminal, stretched out my hand, and tapped the terminal screen. On the list, there was a surprising number of dead margin trades. In addition, ideally, the ones that worked easily with our predictions would be the best. I'd especially love it if people would jump on board automatically without a single thought. Those who had surrendered their thinking to machines with subhuman existences who had lost their privilege of being human. Barton's words came to mind suddenly. These were the appropriate ones to feed off, I suppose. This one. Putting faith in my trusty instincts, I selected the appropriate stock. Black Chocolate Corporated, a name that sounded like some sort of joke. Sounds tasty. Hagana said that spontaneously. You like chocolate? When I asked her, Hagana's face stiffened and she nodded. A little bit. What do you mean by a little bit? You should say whether you like it or not. A little bit. It can't be expressed mathematically. Hagana's words were enough to make me laugh. Hagana stood up and yawned loudly. I'm tired. It's your turn now, Hal. She wobbled and stood up while pointing at me. Get out of my way. Jeez. Hey, what are you... Hagana looked back at me, as if I was acting weird. Except, well, Hagana was standing next to my bed, and had begun to take off her clothes. No matter how you looked at it, Hagana was the one acting weird. I'm tired, really. As she talked, I could see that she was drowsy. Above anything I was saying, she was focused on undoing the buttons of her shirt one by one. I couldn't stop her, so I did all I could to avert my gaze. Hagana put her pajamas on silently, and with a final soft yawn, she crawled into the bed. At that point, I thought I could stop looking away. I thought it would have been better if she went back to her room. On the other hand, I wasn't opposed to this either. 2 people sleeping together was warmer than one sleeping alone. I imagined that Hagana thought that way too, and there's no way she would have been unhappy about it. Move over a bit. A sigh was mixed in with my words. Hagana didn't respond, but she did move over. I lay down as well as I could on one corner to sleep. Hagana's back was to mine. As expected, it would be impossible for us to be mutually this close together when awake. Somehow, I couldn't fall asleep, probably because of that. Even though I was tired, I couldn't sleep. Even though I was sleepy, I couldn't sleep. It felt as if there was some obstruction that hadn't been overcome yet. How? In the middle of things, Hagana suddenly spoke. Huh? I responded in question, but Hagana did not reply. What is it? It seemed there was no response forthcoming. I was going to ask her once more, but I realized that she might have been talking in her sleep. That would be pretty embarrassing too, but she wasn't going to respond either way. I closed my eyes and made an effort to sleep. And it was at that moment that I heard Hagana again. How? I didn't say anything as I looked over my shoulder. Hagana had her back to me, so I couldn't see her face, but I was aware that she was awake. I have a question to ask you. And finally, she managed to say something. I turned back around and responded. What is it? Hagana became quiet again. However, I hadn't expected Hagana to turn her body towards me. Suddenly, I felt as if I couldn't breathe, and any sleepiness disappeared instantly. Hagana placed her forehead on the nape of my neck, which caused my body to freeze up completely. Will you answer my question? In that situation, with that question, as a man, there was only one way I could answer. What is it? I gulped and continued. Is there something else you need to ask me about? What came to mind didn't amount to more than that, and anything else I could think of, I could not manage to say. Yet, Hagana didn't acknowledge those words right away. I thought I would feel annoyed about her silence, but suddenly it occurred to me how stupid my response was. Tomorrow, what will happen if you don't win? I was so surprised that the words wouldn't come out. Hagana's words went through my back and pierced my heart. Tomorrow, what have I lost? With that, I now realized what was stuck on my mind. I don't understand the reason why you suddenly had an interest in the contest, Al. Without understanding the assumptions, the conclusions cannot be understood. Hagana put those small hands of hers on my back. Her hands were unbelievably warm. If you lose, what will happen? It was just like Hagana did not ask what I would do if I lost. If I lost, I would be sold and disappear. The way she asked seemed to call out for an answer like that. My heart was beating rapidly now. It seemed to become so loud that I was dreading the possibility of Hagana hearing it. Perhaps she could hear it. For this long stretch of time, Hagana was cuddled up next to me. Whether we lose or win, the result won't change. Huh? There is something that I haven't said to you yet. Readying myself, I turned around in bed. Within the narrow confines of the futon, Hagana was in front of me. With one hand always across her chest, I could see that she looked cold. What? When the contest ends, I'll leave this place, probably. She wore a puzzled look on her face. After staring at me for some time, she finally asked back, Eh? You see, someone invited me to join them. He's a pro-investor. On top of that, an extremely good one. Hagana looked at me blankly. While she stared at me, only her lips moved coolly. And my trading technique and his methodology are very compatible with each other. So probably I will become his apprentice. There was no reason for me to say it outright. Without a doubt, things could become bad otherwise. Although Barton was rather busy, he took the time to follow our trading record. Compatible? Yeah. More than me? Hagana was straight to the point. I felt she might have been angry as well. No, I changed my mind on that. If I had just made an excuse arbitrarily, then Hagana would be angry. Thinking back on it now, I realized that it was just jealousy. More than me? After asking once more, I had no choice but to answer. The path you walk is different from mine. What do you mean? Depending on the answer, I'll strangle you to death. Hagana's intense eyes were ideal for times like these. Well, how should I put this? Well, don't you feel that you are merely compensating for what I am lacking in? Her program was a clear indicator of that. As a human being at the limits of my abilities, I was being assisted by the power of technology. However, Hagana did not respond, and her eyes urged me to continue. But the person who invited me on, he's someone who is far more amazing than I am. On top of that, he's far more skilled in things I'm aiming for. Based on numbers in the market, I could see through the perceptions of people to turn a profit. Barton looked at things for a more fundamental level in order to understand people's thinking. Stock was a necessity to move corporation forward, and a corporation was a gathering of people. Thus, his trading technique was on a level 2 or 3 times above where I stood. So, that is why I want to learn how to trade from him. Take me with you. That was Hagana's immediate reply. That rather surprised me. I never imagined that she would say something like that. I will be useful to you, Hal. Besides, there's also the issue of the debts of the people in this town. That won't work. That was what I said. And then I said it once more. That won't work at all. Hagana was not sad at all, just that it was her usual expression, while her lips stopped moving, as if she were about to say something, before she pursed her lips tightly. With that expression, the only thing that betrayed any emotion was those lips. Those lips tightened. For the debts of the townspeople, with just a bit of time, you could take care of it. I can't. Of course you can. Don't lie. When I said that, she raised an eyebrow. Hagana was incapable of telling a lie. Why? Hagana asked me, but maybe she was more questioning whether it was because of her investing technique. I hesitated. Hagana asked once more. Why do you need to follow that man? Don't you already have all the money you need? I was taken by surprise by the words that I didn't expect to hear. Of course Hagana was serious, and certainly that was the result of her understanding. Hagana looked at me, and even now looked like she was on the verge of crying. Or rather, because of the darkness, I wasn't really sure, but it's possible that she was already crying. The money isn't enough. It isn't enough at all. Then you can grow it. That was Hagana's response. From the nasal sound of her voice, I knew that she was crying. I was lost, and I hesitated before I clasped Hagana's hand. It isn't enough. Not at all. But 10 million moles is not enough. What I want is 10 billion moles, or maybe even 100 billion moles. There were playthings for children of that sort, paper money that had endless zeros written on them. 100 billion moles was something like that to most people. But currently the richest person of all mankind, the legendary trader called Mr. Infallible, had assets totaling 82 billion moles. Thus, 100 billion moles was not an impossible answer. In Newton City, there's a road called Schrödinger Street. It's the focal point of financial alchemists who work at investment banks and hedge funds. It's where I must battle it out and win at all costs. For that, I must first train under the person who invited me on. I couldn't imagine that Hagana understood what I was talking about. Thus, when Hagana opened her mouth, the words that came out were not entirely unexpected. I don't understand. What will you do with all that money? This was Hagana, who, when given 200 moles, would find no use for it. I wonder if she asked that question only because she didn't understand. I looked away from Hagana. As for that question on what I'd do with all that money, I had that answer. But I was scared. I was scared of being laughed at after talking about it. But Hagana looked at me intently. Those eyes, they were frantic. Lisa had said to me to not push Hagana aside. If I were to keep this to myself, then I would be pushing Hagana aside. Having said that, opening myself up was indeed scary. Yet, I looked back at Hagana's eyes. Before Hagana had started trading using her software, she showed her courage while watching by my side as I traded. Seeing her absorb everything on the screen brought up a particular moment. During that time, while she struggled, she continued to do her work as a teacher. At that time, Hagana said something to me. "They also have dreams," she said. "I have a dream." Hagana looked at me, and then she spoke. "What is it?" "Are you going to laugh?" But even if it were pathetic to do so, I couldn't help but ask such a question. Hagana stared at me, and after a while gave me an honest answer. "I don't know." A bit too honest. I was hoping that she would at least lie and say that she wouldn't laugh. But for Hagana, if there was even the slightest chance of that happening, she wouldn't say it. "But I want to hear it." Hagana said it clearly. But she wasn't lying. She really did want to hear it. I took one step forward. "If I were to have 100 billion moles, there is something I want to do." "What?" "I was born on the moon." I somehow thought that she was going to say something suddenly, but Hagana did not respond. On that note, I continued. "I'm different from those born on Earth. My birthplace was on the frontier of mankind's expansion." As always, Hagana continued to look intently at me, though I wonder if I've seen this expression in her eyes before. "And so?" "So there is no frontier for me." Frontier. Have you seen the Sea of Tranquility Memorial Hall? It was the place to preserve the simple footprints of the first man to set foot on the moon. Hagana shook her head slowly. "But I know about it." "There, the footprints of the first person on the moon are there." "You want that memorial hall for yourself?" Without thinking, I laughed at Hagana's words. Hagana looked hurt by my action and glared at me quickly. "Sorry, but no, that's not it. What's the point of buying the footprints?" "Well, then what?" "No. What I mean is that, like those footprints, I want to set foot on undiscovered territory as well. Hagana, who had gotten angry at being laughed at, continued to glare at me with those intense eyes, but she did not try to shake my hand off her. Undiscovered territory? Yeah. But as Hagana said that, she looked somewhat downcast. She was thinking about it. Where could such a place be? The moon's surface had been completely traversed, and underground excavation was already progressing. Long before Earth's surface had been completely mapped by satellites, there was no mountain mankind hadn't set foot on, and no seabed that hadn't been explored with observation vessels. I wasn't sure whether Hagana was thinking about human history or not, but after thinking for a while, she turned her focus back on me. I can't come up with a place such as that. I then responded proudly. Mars. Within my grasp, Hagana's arm stiffened. Perhaps she was taken by surprise there. But Mars is... In the past, there was the Mars Immigration Project. With the orbital elevator, it was theoretically possible to reach Mars. But while the project was progressing, the moon declared itself to be an independent nation, and it supposedly became a political issue. Questions like whether Mars should become an independent nation, and wouldn't that lead to the flames of interplanetary war in the future should a planet become an independent nation. Besides, development on the lunar surface isn't over yet, so those plans ground to a halt. Hagana held her breath as I spoke. So, if I can earn 100 billion mools, I wish to continue that project with my own money. If I'm not very smart, so it isn't possible for me to attend Lunar City University, study space engineering, and become an astronaut. But as a sponsor, I can gather people with the power of money, and even aid in the construction of space vessels. 100 billion mools is the kind of money that would be enough to manage a large country. Also, there is someone who has reached 80 billion mools. It's not a pipe dream. It isn't a pipe dream at all. I held Hagana's hand tightly as I spoke quietly yet passionately. Up until now, this was a dream that I had spoken to no one about. If it weren't for this darkness, I'm sure it would be obvious that I was blushing a great deal. But in the end, Hagana did not laugh. Instead, she said this to me. Do you really think you can do it? A realistic question. More than wanting to laugh, I felt my chest tighten. This question was enough to make me want to cry pathetically. That's not how it is, right? At some point, the hand I was holding Hagana's hand with ended up being held in hers instead. Keep going until it works, right? It is not that different. I had intended to say that, but honestly, I wasn't sure whether or not it would have been too dubious. That was how bewildered I was by Hagana's words. Amazing. I think it's an amazing dream. Hagana squeezed my hand and returned, closed her eyes, and swayed back and forth gently as she spoke. She looked like a clumsy robot that wasn't capable of showing emotion in any other way. So, for your dream, is it necessary for you to win the contest? She asked me, and I couldn't hold Hagana's simple way of stating things against her. Besides, at this point, I couldn't hide it any longer. No, that is a different matter. Different? Yeah. The contest isn't for my sake. I don't understand. Hagana replied honestly, and that honestly caused me some level of anguish. It's for your sake. Hagana looked at me. Huh? I said it before. The person who invited me on said that he could only take me. I won't be able to invest here anymore. That is why, well... As I hesitated, Hagana spoke. What? So I thought that you should have funds to be able to continue to live with Lisa and be able to attend university. 200,000 moles should be enough, right? You won't lose her books 4 times, right? That last one was a joke. But it seemed that Hagana was actually angry as she kicked my foot under the covers. Ouch! Stop kicking me! Idiots! She said that as she kicked me. But it did dawn on me. Hagana wasn't angry at me because I was talking about her having lost that book. She was angry about something completely different. For my sake? Why? Hagana cried and closed her eyes tightly as she hung her head down in shame. I was confused as to what I should do. Immediately afterwards, Hagana let go of my hand and lashed out with all her energy. You idiot! I was falling to the ground along with the futon, and right when I was on the verge of doing so, my hand reached the floor. But this time, Hagana was facing the other direction on the bed and curled up in a ball. At that point, I decided to just leave her be, and I stood up after getting my feet off the bed. The futon was on the ground, so I could clearly see Hagana curled up in a ball. She was curled up like a newborn, but her hands wrapped across her legs. Looking at her now, she seemed completely different from when she was in her room, so scared that she couldn't even recognize Lisa. Thinking about that, it might have been because of Hagana's face the moment she kicked me out. The moment I fell out of the bed, I got a clear look at Hagana's face. She was apparently very embarrassed. Overwhelmed with happiness, and embarrassed by it, it seemed. I hesitated for a moment, but at this rate, Hagana might catch a cold. But I also wanted to sleep in bed. After all, tomorrow was the last day of trading. In the end, I returned the futon to the bed and got back in. Hagana continued to stay curled up, facing the wall. I thought I'd look the other way as well, but I scolded myself for being too spineless. If you asked me whether this was a buy or a sell, I'd say it's a buy. I'll be completely honest. I thought this was going to end worse. I thought these two were going to end on poor terms. But it's been okay so far. It could very well easily change right now, but we'll see. I slept face up. Hagana didn't say anything else. But whether in my dreams or in the back of my mind, I felt rather refreshed to have said it all. Also, it was huge that Hagana didn't outright reject or laugh at the idea. I felt my body warm up, and once sleepiness set in, I moved my hand. I reached out for Hagana's hand as it was wrapped around her legs and held on lightly. For a moment, Hagana's body shrank back, but she did not try to shake me off. We slept just like that. Much like how the moon and the earth were tied together by gravity, that thin line connected Hagana and me together securely.